All right, welcome everyone to the first ever session with admissions at Tuck with GMAT Club. We are here today with Sudershan, who is the Associate Director at Tuck Admissions. Sudershan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Savik, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to connect to the audience at large on GMAT Club through this podcast series. Appreciate you setting it up. So I'm Sudarshan. I go by Suds. I handle all of Tuck's outreach efforts in India and Southeast Asia in general, and I'm also a member of the admissions committee and give my input into the committee about the applicants.
It's easy into my first question. So, how do you select essays? Like, what to you makes a good essay topic?
See, for us, the foremost thing about any applicant is how well someone is able to relate to the school and how well someone is able to represent themselves to the school through their application. So whatever really brings that out, that aspect of that passion, that commitment, that energy that they bring to talk, how well do they understand themselves, how well are they able to uh, represent themselves, and how much passion are they able to demonstrate. Those are all things sort of that we are always looking at, and the questions are really a reflection of us trying to ease that out of the applicants in so many ways.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it must be a difficult process because it sure is difficult for applicants.
Well, there are many business schools. I've actually heard from some of the admissions consultants that have that I've talked to earlier, and they say that Tuck has one of the longest applications, right? And there are other business schools that make their decisions based on simply one single essay.
Right.
Well, I don't know if there is a right or a wrong way to approach it. We just want to make sure that for us it's more important to make sure that the right it more than making sure that the right candidate is admitted. We want to make sure that someone who cannot relate to Tuck or is not the right fit for Tuck, somehow inadvertently doesn't get admitted. So for us it's a way of keeping the whole process honest and ensuring that we are able to at the end of the day put together a class that really speaks to the Tuck culture, the community, the cohesiveness, the inclusiveness that the community itself provides. Those are the kind of candidates we are trying to admit. And this is, I guess, our way of ensuring that continues to be the case.
Right. I mean, I do have a bunch of application questions, but I just wanted to focus on you a little bit. You also are a very proud Tuck alumni yourself. You graduated in 2010, but like 7 years down the line, you also help others get into Tuck. So how did that happen? Like, what made that shift possible?
Well, it's serendipity in many ways, but it's also once a Tuckie, always a Tuckie. Like you mentioned, I graduated from Tuck in 2010, and my journey through the 2 years at Tuck was nothing short of fantastic. And when I moved to India to work in venture capital private equity industry after my MBA, I sort of felt physically separated and also mentally separated from a place that has given me so much in those 2 years. Because I literally lived a lifetime of experiences in those 2 years in Hanover. And I wanted to see how I can continue to be part of that sort of an environment, even if I'm halfway around the world.
Right.
And so I started getting involved in helping with admissions receptions, and so one thing led to the other, and here I am working to promote and project the Tuck experience and the community, and the what the school stands for in this part of the world.
I mean, you're doing a good job because
Thanks.
Tuck volumes are up almost every single year. And I think GMAT Club, I mean, I have to say this though, but GMAT Club has a cult following on Tuck. And I'm just not saying this because I'm with you, but I think over the years we have had a bunch of people who would swear by Tuck or probably only apply to one school, and then once they become current students, they would come back to the forums and almost like try to convince everyone with multiple admits to join Tuck instead. I think people do that. Why is there such a cult following for Tuck?
Well, I don't think it's a cult following. It is what the school enables people to accomplish by virtue of their coming to Tuck.
Sure.
And this fascinating experience. I refer to how my 2 years were the most fantastic 2 years. Up until that point. At the 2 years that I spent at Tuck, and I think that sort of experience resonates pretty much across the campus. If you talk to the 285 students that are in any given class, I think every one of them would say exactly the same thing, and so it's no surprise therefore that they all become very passionate ambassadors for the school.
Yeah.
And they want everyone else to experience the same for lack of a better word, the magic that they themselves experienced at Tuck. And so I'm not surprised that there is so many of prospective applicants that have been on GMAT forums that have come to Tuck as students, graduated, and are now exhorting future applicants to come take a look. So
Yeah.
that's not so surprising at all.
Yeah, but you'd be happy to know that like we do B school reviews on the forums as well. It's been a new feature since the last I think year or so, and Tuck has been like significantly higher in popularity and reviews. And we do get reviews from both current students, alums, and also students who have been in a campus visit. So, and Tuck has been very, very highly rated. I'll share with you once our podcast is over. But I'm just going to switch to the application side as well. I think a lot of us who apply to schools are very quiet on the forums. Don't speak to a lot of people till the time we hit submit. And then once that is over, I think for Tuck, I think last year it was 11:59 Pacific, and I think once that is over, everybody is on great speculation mode. Like, okay, so what is going to happen? So what do you think happens? I'm sure you know. So what happens when someone hits submit?
Well, there's nothing, no, secret, right? I mean, I think we are known as one of the most transparent schools out there in terms of how the process itself unfolds. We collate all the information that has been submitted. If the recommendations haven't yet come in, we wait until those sort of percolate through the system. If somebody hasn't yet submitted their GMAT scores, we err on the side of the candidate, right? So if I've had so many people who come and requested saying, hey Suds, can you help me out please? My for whatever reason my GMAT score did not get reported as planned, and now I'm past the deadline, but could you please consider? And we are happy to make those sort of adjustments.
Right.
Even though it's only fair for the candidate if they've done everything that they could to submit the application, but there's something or the other that kind of held things up. We say that we err on the side of the candidate and say if it's a genuine issue, then we don't mind helping you, right? So that's how we so we are very applicant centric in our approach. So once all these the information that has been submitted, essays, etc., has been collated, it goes off for reads. I think every application gets read at least twice, irrespective of GMAT score. So at Tuck, there is no screening based on any aspect of the application. Every application will get read at least twice, and applications that really and again going back to the point I was making earlier, that we are very applicant centric sort of a committee. We want to see, even if everything is not absolutely perfect, we want to give the candidate the benefit of doubt, and we will potentially invite the candidate for an interview if they haven't already gone to campus and done the candidate initiated interview.
Right.
So we traditionally we interview a vast majority of the applicants across the board, and because we want to get to know the applicants very very well. So not only are these the various events that are coming up in and around India, Southeast Asia, etc. We make an effort to actually understand, meet candidates, get to know them, and continue following up with them, even beyond the application, getting to know what the candidate brings to the table. All of those things happen, and the interview is yet another data point. It's never a make or break. Once the interview is done, whether it's applicant initiated or whether it is the committee invited interview, it again goes back into another complete review.
Right.
So interview by itself doesn't vote a candidate one way or the other. And then the committee sits down and basically debates every applicant. So I have all the applicants that I met and that I've been very impressed with over the past few months. It's a way of in so many ways. I guess the conversations in the admissions committee are all about why should somebody not get in versus why should somebody get in. Yeah, so we are always defending why somebody should be getting in, and so and we need to be proven wrong versus the other way around, where we are simply weeding candidates out. So so we are candidate centric almost to a fault, right? So we and then again it goes back into looking at the overall pool, how things are sort of balancing out, and then the results basically come out whenever they come out. So it's not any major secret thing going on. It's very open. Applicants keep writing to us all the time saying, hey, is there anything else I can submit? What can I do to continue to showcase my interest and so on. And everything that the applicant submits us, even beyond what they've submitted, always gets added to their file at some point or the other.
Yeah, but I think I've had a bit of experience with school admissions themselves, but that's very unique of Tuck, because I don't know many schools who would do this. And also the argument that you made for you try to explain why a candidate is not a fit instead of the other way around, I think really manifests itself into your student initiatives. I think on a very similar note, you also have a very exhaustive reapplication feedback process. Conversation that I've had with Tuck reapplicants, Tuck has a very pointed advice and almost critical to someone's application. So why do you think you are different in that aspect, and how do you think it helps Tuck and the reapplicants?
See, it's kind of a no-brainer from our point of view, right? In so many ways. First of all, we appreciate the fact that somebody is willing to wait for a whole year to reapply to Tuck, right? That means something. That's a statement in itself that the applicant is making. And so when somebody is taking the effort to understand the school better and represent themselves better the next time around, doesn't it make sense that they should at least have some guidelines based on which they should look at improving whatever it is that might have played against them the previous time. And so we proactively in many cases give a lot of feedback to applicants. We also give a lot of feedback to applicants who ask for it from their end. And we do that simply because we don't want the whole application process to be a black box, to be a black box where this applicant doesn't even know what were the grounds on which somebody either made the cut or did not. And so I've had enough feedback calls to applicants in India over the last few months, where I've given, you mentioned pointed feedback, and if I don't give pointed feedback, and if I just tell them, hey, look for some very broad sort of things, it's not going to be any helpful to the candidate to make it a better application the next time around. And frankly, we want to see in reapplicants that they've taken the feedback seriously, and that they've made those changes, that whatever we have asked them to do, and that will only stand them in good stead at the end of the day, because we view reapplicants favorably. There is no stigma attached to being a reapplicant at all.
Sure.
And the fact that they've waited around for another year, the fact that they've taken the feedback seriously, the fact that they've done whatever they can to address the feedback that they've been given, all of those only make it a better experience for us when we are reading that application. Now we say, okay, this candidate has arrived, right? And at that point, it's a pretty straightforward decision, hopefully.
Right.
So so that's why for us, again, it goes back to the applicant centric approach that we have as a committee, that we want to err on the side of the applicant. We want to give the applicant every single opportunity that they can leverage to make it a better application, either the first time or the second time, or whatever it is that we can help in making it a stronger turnaround. We are happy to do that.
Right. I clearly remember this. There was one person who was, I think he was waitlisted in round 1. I think this was back in 2015 or 2016, and I remember it was very unique. That sort of Tuck proposed to him that like we do like you, and in case you don't make it beyond the waitlist this year, we'd be happy to coach you through an application next year. So and I think I've not seen honestly any other school do that for any applicant. And I think that's very, very generous and very exemplifies what you just said about being applicant centric.
Well, it goes back to the vision that Dean Slaughter has said it out loud, and what Tuck stands for. It's personal, it's connected, it's transformative, right? And it doesn't have to be that way only when someone actually enters Tuck. We want it to be that way for anybody who is touched by Tuck, even through the application process, right? And so we want it to be a very personal experience when someone comes to an event. I've hung out with applicants long after these admissions receptions or coffee chats or whatever, until way past midnight many times, because I don't want them to go away not being able to ask a question just because of time constraints, right? So if I'm there, I want to make sure that I answer whatever question is still needs to be answered. So it's a very personalized approach. It's very connected. In a sense, you just have to reach out to Tuckies, whether it's current students or alumni, and odds are applicants will get a lot of conversations going with Tuckies, getting to understand what their experience itself has been, and how what further they can do to make their application stronger, getting to know a little bit more about the culture by talking to someone who's been through that experience, and certainly transformative. And that goes back to even the reapplicant feedback that we give. If it's able to transform these applicants who for whatever reason were unsuccessful the first time around, make it a much stronger, is enabling them to introspect a lot more than what they've done, is able to make it a more compelling application at the end of the day when they reapply. It's only going to transform their whole approach to getting the best out of the business school experience they're looking for. So it's basically replicating that across the
Right.
whole, I guess, for lack of a better word in business speak, the value chain of business school uh, application, submitting to evaluation to decision making process.
Sure. So, I think you talked a lot about being applicant centric. So let me ask you like a question that would force you to think otherwise. So who do you think doesn't belong to TUC? So what kind of an applicant would you be very, very cautious before admitting?
Who doesn't belong to TUC? We hope everyone feels like they belong to TUC. We want, let me talk about people who we want, more than more than I talk about who we don't want. And I guess in that answer lies the other bit as well. I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier. We want people to demonstrate their passion for the school. uh, and in that very statement lies what kind of research have they done, uh, how do they envision being part of the community once they get in, what kind of resources have they leveraged up until now to get to know about the school, even if they haven't had an opportunity to go visit the campus. The reason why there are so many events, and I think across business schools as a whole, TUC probably has, and I'm going out on a limb here, the most number of events in India as such. And maybe broadly speaking, even in Southeast Asia as a whole, we understand that not everyone has the time or the energy or the wherewithal to make a trip to campus. And so my endeavor therefore is to bring the campus to TUC in whatever, from TUC to these sort of events in whichever way possible, that the applicants get a feel for what the school is like, what the community is like, what the experience is like. So to the extent that I can recreate, that's what I try to do. And there typically are alumni who are attending these events and sharing their experiences. So short of visiting the campus, which is probably the best way to get to know the school, we want people to feel like they've had every single opportunity to connect with the school, short of being there in person.
Right.
And get the nuances of what is it that really first of all, is TUC really the place for them? Because it's at the end of the day, it's a very small community. It's one of the smallest in the Ivy League for sure, and it's one of the smallest schools across the board. And and where everyone gets to know everyone else, you are doing a lot of things together. There is no scope for being anonymous on campus. So is that kind of a very close knit, very highly connected it becomes your family away from home. Is that sort of intense experience for you, right? It all starts from there. And if it is, then we can continue the conversation. So for us, it's someone, the right candidate sort of transcends all of these things that we are trying to look for. And certainly knows themselves, in addition to getting to know TUC. A lot of introspection. What do you want to do? Why do you want to come to TUC? And how do you think TUC will take you where you want to go? And how is it? How are you going to leverage all these resources that TUC is going to throw at you? And how are you going to get there? And by the way, how are you going to contribute to the school while you are there? Because every single individual leaves their impression on the TUC culture, the community. We want every person to be to take ownership of that, right? And to leave their own mark on school for years to come.
Right.
So how are you going to be able to do that? So it's a very, very it's a highly engaging, highly highly personal we that's the reason why we want to get to know applicants, as best as we possibly can, so that there is once the decision is made, there's no doubt in our minds that we picked the right person, right? And in so many ways, Tuck is a very self-selective community. Only a person of a certain caliber, a certain character, a certain attitude, a certain aptitude will thrive at Tuck. And it being like I said, one of the smaller class sizes across business schools, even and pretty much everything at Tuck gets done in teams, starting with the fall A, fall B quarters in the first year, where you are in study groups, where you don't get to choose who is studying with you in that group. The school assigns, and it's geographically diverse team, it's a professionally diverse team, and you have to just figure out how to work as a team to produce the results for yourself and your team, right? So in that sort of a highly people centric, team oriented sort of a community, if somebody doesn't really want to be part of a team, obviously that person is not a very good fit.
Sure.
If that person is a lot more independently driven, there's nothing wrong with being independently driven, but at the same time, are you able to take people along, or are you the sort of person who will who want to grow individually at the cost of not letting other people come with you, right? So these are all sort of facets of candidate that we are trying to tease out during so many different interactions through the application review process, through the interviews, and all of these. So when people talk about there are so many people who write back to me after the interview. I do an interview, they feel great about the interview, and I feel great about the interview too, but I don't have any control on the outcome, right? Because like I said, it again becomes it goes into another review,
right?
Overall. And at the end of the day, if they don't make it, they feel very disappointed, and they say, hey Saj, I thought it was great, what happened? And there isn't a formula as such why someone will or will not make it. There are so many of these things that are in the play, in play, so to speak. And it's a fascinating exercise of trying to put this sort of a very highly accomplished yet highly caring for each other kind of a class together at the for every year. And frankly, it's that excitement of putting that together. It's the challenge of putting that together. That's what keeps the whole committee going. We again roll up our sleeves and get back to getting things done, because we feel so excited about doing it all over again year after year. I think I kind of gave you a much longer answer than what you were looking for, but hopefully that clarifies to some extent what you're looking for.
I mean, I think something that I've always wondered was the whole selection process, and we do have people who will still, what you said, who would make bullet points out of them and put check boxes to make their application. I think that's a good way to go about it, but I also think that like having some sort of a sense of what Tuck is looking for and what is it not looking for will generally help applicants. I think one of the things that I have seen people struggle with is like writing accomplishment and at the same time not be bashful, right? And I see a lot of that from what you said. It's not about, it's somewhat maybe about individual accomplishment, but it's also a lot about maybe how you have accomplished what you have in a team. And I think that's one of the crucial elements at Tuck, and how it sort of creates structures within the class. So a quick follow-up though, while like you're making an argument about how Tuck is very applicant centric and how we always give applicants the benefit of doubt. Tuck is also highly selective, right? It's one of the hardest places to get into, and I'm sure you get a lot of emails saying that, hey, such the application went great, what happened? And I'm sure you get your fair share of those and more. Then in that case, do you often feel that an applicant's outcome is sometimes based on the dynamics of the class that is entering that year? If so, how do you think the time when the person applies, like has an impact on his or her outcome?
No, I mean we as a committee, we are not making any judgments on how the class needs to be upfront, right? There is no formula. People keep wondering, hey, is if I am an Indian IT male, engineer, whatever, I don't stand a chance to get in. I think I think that's a very loosely worded statement. I mean, I think if I was an Indian IT male engineer, whatever, I'd be doing myself a disservice, in spite of all the accomplishments that I probably have, in saying that I'm either a worthwhile candidate for Tuck or not, right? I mean, how can so many people send me a resume and say, Suds, can you please evaluate my profile and say whether I can get into Tuck or not? And it's actually it's next to impossible to just look at a resume without even knowing the candidates and say hey, it's great or it doesn't work. I just cannot make the judgment call on anyone without knowing anything about that person other than a piece of paper that they've sent me, right? So it's going back to your question, the committee makes no judgment calls ahead of time on what the class composition has to be or anything. It is completely a function of how strong is the pool of applicants in any given year, right? And for us, I mean, I'm if I talk about Indian applicants for a minute, so many applicants think that they've kind of so there's let me hit on a couple of things here that sort of are coming up in my mind.
Absolutely.
So somehow there is this impression out there that if they apply early, all said and done, they stand a great chance. Well, my point is, if you apply early, that's great. But if your application is not well thought out, it's not going to leave you any better off, right? So just because you apply early does not necessarily mean that if it's a half-baked application, that it stands any chance, right? So irrespective of when you apply, and it really doesn't really matter whether you apply in whichever round. If your application is not the best it can be, it's not going to speak to much about you in the first place, right? So I want to make sure the applicants know that you have to do your homework no matter which round you're applying in. Early action doesn't mean that somehow we are less lax about the whole review process, right? And at the same time, if somebody applies in a later round, right, we want to everything still says the same. Maybe they're applying late for whatever reason, but is applying to Tuck sort of an afterthought, or have they actually thought through this, and how well have they researched the school? Hopefully they and ideally, in my case, I don't want to be figuring out who's done their research and who's not, right? I want everyone to do their research no matter which round they're applying in, and I want people to apply only when they feel absolutely ready. In fact, there are so many applicants that have told me in over the years that they don't feel very comfortable applying in the early action round because they felt like their essay did not completely like resonate with them, and I truly respect that. And they applied in the November round or whatever other round, and they did a great job after that, and and got in as a result, right? So applying early with a half-baked application is as unproductive as applying late without doing the research just because you want to get through the deadlines. And don't apply with a deadline constraint in mind. Apply when you are absolutely ready.
Right.
And the other thing that I wanted to share is don't hesitate to reach out to Tuckies irrespective of where they are, because typically if we are all very happy to talk about Tuck, right? I mean that's a pretty uniform statement across Tuckies, across all generations, right? So we love to talk about the school, we love to share our experiences. So even if it means you might be thinking, oh my god, I'm bugging this guy again, how can I ask the same question again to 10 different people? It doesn't really matter. We are happy to share our thoughts, our experiences, and give you input, and maybe connect you with other people who are in who have your background in my class that I might not I might not be the right person to give you that perspective, but the other person could be.
Right.
So there are any number of ways to learn more about what Tuck can do for you. And once you see that sort of passion flowing from the alumni, it's and once you hear from alumni again in these sessions that we organize, it's a matter of channeling that passion into your essays in so many ways, which is not the same as just reading a bunch of things online on the website and trying to replicate it. It almost always falls flat, right? So to me, when I say to me, the admissions committee is really looking at how has someone really taken the time to understand the school and how they are going to be a part of that community, and how they are going to, again, I think I'm repeating a lot of things that I've already said. But in Indian applicants specifically, don't have to just because of a deadline go ahead and apply if it's not a fully done application. And also the other thing is there's also this impression that somehow because Tuck has this applicant initiated interview, that if you visit campus somehow you are in you made it.
Okay.
Right. I mean, if you visited campus, maybe you already applied. Maybe you will apply after you come back from that visit or whatever. But just a visit is more for you to understand the school better, and it is in no way sort of a somehow a proxy for a good application. Right. So it a majority, maybe I should also probably go out on a limb. I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but a higher percentage of admitted students from India visit Tuck for the first time at the time of matriculation. Right. And so if there are so many opportunities for you to get to know the school, and you're most welcome to go visit the campus. Absolutely, there's no better way to get a feel for the school than being there. But if you don't have the time or the the energy to go make the trip, nothing is lost. You still have every every chance of making it to the admitted to the list of admitted candidates while sitting here, nothing taken away from you,
Hmm.
right? And that's the whole reason why we are conducting so many events around the world, is because we know that international applicants may not always find it easy to make a visit to Hanover to come visit the schools, and that's why there are so many events. So take advantage of all those opportunities to connect with the school and represent yourself well in the application.
I think which reminds me of a very unique initiative that you are doing in the coming weeks, which is you're bringing a classroom to Hyderabad.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? It's very unique, and I do wish to go. So, any thoughts on why you are doing this?
Well, I hope you can make it. It's on I think it's on July 23rd in Hyderabad in Taj Krishna. It starts at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. So I've done this for about 3 years now. Professor Kopalle is a world-renowned. He's an exponent in all things marketing and statistics and consumer research in general. And he whenever he comes to India for a conference or a research program or whatever, I basically latch on to his schedule and say I bug him and say that I would love for him to host a mock class. Again, I go back to what I was saying just a few minutes earlier, that there are all these amazing opportunities for you to get to know the school without ever leaving the country, right? And this mock class is simply another avenue to realize that. It's you will get to meet with the professor. He's going to conduct a lecture just as he would in a Tuck classroom. There would be some cold calling, there would be some banter, there would be some really thought-provoking sort of engaging discussion, and to the extent that I can help replicate that experience, that is why we've been organizing these events. I think last year was in Shanghai. 2 years prior it was in Mumbai, and the year prior to that we were in Hyderabad again. So so it's again an opportunity for prospective applicants to get a feel for the thought leadership that exists in Tuck faculty.
Yeah.
The the top-notch sort of learning experience that is there in every single classroom session at Tuck.
Yeah.
Right, there's so much to learn, so much to take away, and this is just an effort to give a glimpse of that while not leaving the confines of the country that you're in.
I mean, I do wish to join you, but I also think that's a very, very unique way to get to know Tuck. It's not just an event. It's not just hearing alumni speaking. It's actually a classroom. So I think brilliant initiative there.
So I will also say that it is not a Tuck reception that doubles up as a mock class. And it is not primarily a Tuck admissions reception. And oh, by the way, Professor Kopalle is going to speak for a half an hour. This is a pure mock class session. So there's no presentation about the Tuck school. This is really an opportunity to simply immerse in the classroom experience for a couple of hours.
Right. All right. So I'm going to shift a little bit to applications again, because that's what most of your listeners right now are really interested in. So one question that I had was, you mentioned that, I think I just want to recap a bit of what you said. So you also mentioned that half-baked early action won't get you in just as much as like lack of research in in the November and the January rounds. So I honestly feel that Tuck application is such that if your research is half-baked, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, because it's a very exhaustive application. It's not one single question. So, so Tuck would force you to evaluate what you want to get out of business school in the short and long term, what you have done that prepares you for that career. And this is a question that I love to ask admissions from any school, that, how much do you think career goals play a part in figuring out the entire application process in terms of, like how realistic it is and how achievable it is, and how people actually go about their career goals. Like, just to give you like a candid example, when you applied, if there was a career goals essay question back then, did you end up doing what you thought you would do before joining Tuck?
I'm a I, I'm probably one of the more oddball applicants who is doing exactly what I graduated wanting to be rather. So my essays were all about wanting to be in venture capital and private equity,
Right.
which is what I ended up doing after I graduated, albeit in the emerging markets, right? So in that sense, my goals and my aspirations were, you know, it took a long time for me to introspect, but again, this is not about me. If you talk about the applicants in general, uh, the committee understands and appreciates that goals can change, right? You might think about yourself as you want to be in consulting, or you want to be in investment banking or something upfront, because typically those are the career choices that most people dream about when they go to business school. So at the time of writing an essay, maybe you talk about how you want to be a consultant, or how you want to be a banker once you graduate in the short term, and in the long term, whatever it is that you want to do. The point that we are trying to understand is knowing very well that those goals could change. Once you come to business school, you will say, what, I don't think I really like those long hours of work, or the travel schedule is not for me. I'm going to change my career goals into something more into a sort of a manufacturing, or a sales, or real estate, or maybe you completely change your thought process about what you are the best, what resonates with you. We completely understand and appreciate that, but to the extent that you understand yourself as of now, how well are you able to represent that? Right? Have you thought through why you want to be a consultant now at this point in time, and how well have you introspected that is the right thing for you to be doing, and how have you done your homework on what that entails, and why you want to be why you are going to be that successful consultant that you are talking about, right? And we fully understand that we are not going to hold your feet to fire, saying once you come to campus, hey, you told us in your essay that you wrote you want to be a consultant, and now you are going off to work in GE or whatever. That's not our that's not how we operate. But to the extent that you are making a statement about yourself, we want you to be clear about that. We want you to be we want you to have introspected about it, and we want you to communicate it as clearly as possible, so that we can see clearly that you have a line of thought that is subject to change, of course, but at least the fact that you have a line of thought is important,
Which is logical at the present.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think this is like a very general conundrum, that should I have a career goal which is really honest versus a career goal which is, makes sense for Tuck. And I'll be honest, perception for Tuck is very, very consulting focused, right? And you must know that from the volumes of applicants that you get who want to get into consulting, and hence Tuck, and I can understand how it's short-sighted. But could you tell us about other initiatives at Tuck beyond consulting, and why Tuck is not a consulting school?
Well, I'm actually glad you asked me that question, I've never considered Tuck as a consulting school. It's a general management program, and as you know, people going to graduating from Tuck go into consulting, into banking, into real estate, into private equity, into venture capital, into manufacturing, into technology. I mean, it, international business. I mean, it's across the board in terms of the number of things, the kind of things that people do once they graduate from Tuck. I don't necessarily understand why people think it's so much of a consulting school. It's probably because like most other schools, a reasonable percentage of the outgoing class ends up being in consulting, I guess. But other than that, there's no real reason why. In fact, I'll give you a real example. There was an applicant, so I was conducting a coffee chat in the Middle East, and there was an applicant there, and over the duration of the conversation, she was in the CPG business. That was her background, and when she introduced herself, she said, I want to be a consultant, and she gave her reasons, but I sort of had a conversation with her where I was pushing her to understand why she wanted to be again, nothing wrong about being a consultant, but I just wanted to understand her
rationale,
thought process, and why she was saying what she was saying. And at the end of the conversation, she basically came back and said, Suds, I think consulting is not what I want to do. As a result of this conversation, I think it's been eye-opening, and I want to focus a lot more on marketing. I don't understand why I was talking about consulting all this. Well, it's probably because I was sort of influenced by all the things that I was reading on the forums, and thinking that consulting is exactly what I want to do. And I said, better late than never, but this is the sort of the introspection that I'm encouraging you to do before you start and go ahead and apply. Where you don't want to make up a goal just for sounding good, but I'd rather it be, if consulting is exactly what you want to do, no question, that's what you need to say. But just to sort of fit in, if you want to say consulting, even if that's not internally what you're excited about, I would rather you just say it out loud that this is what you want to do and this is why you want to do it. And she is now an admitted student at Tuck. She talks day in and day out about how eye-opening that conversation was that she had. So it's those sort of conversations are I challenge applicants a lot about what is the job, and it's not simply about consulting, right? If somebody says they want to be in venture capital or private equity or whatever, I want them to explain why. I want them to think about why that, and what are the have you thought through this, and how do you want to are you saying it just for the sake of saying it, or are you saying it because you believe in it? And the tone, I mean, whether you realize it or not, when you really believe in something, when you really are passionate about whatever you have in mind, you don't have to make it sound authentic. It happens by default, and it's that authenticity that I and by extension the admissions committee is looking for. And the more authentic you are, the more the better off you are. So I encourage candidates to be true to themselves, authentic in the way they put things forward, and not second guess the committee about, hey, the committee is going to like hearing consulting a lot, so let me say that just because the committee is going to appreciate me more. Sure. That's never the case. And even for long-term goals, I'll mention it also, that long-term goals by default are are not so crystallized as short-term goals. So short-term goals is in the immediate future after MBA. but at the same time they shouldn't be super vague either. I've read enough applications where the candidates say things like, I want to do something in the United Nations in the long term. Well, it's great that you want to do something in United Nations, but why? Like, what is the rationale? What would you have accomplished up until that point that you're going to talk about the United Nations? I want to change the world. It's great you want to change the world, but how? Give me more. Do you want to change the world by doing something about, again, people will say, I want to change the world by addressing climate change. That's an admirable goal, but how? Don't just don't just say something for the sake of sounding good. Give us a little more to sort of appreciate why you are saying what you're saying, so that at the end of the day, we understand your motivations and you feel good about what you represented to us.
I mean, no two applicants are similar. I really hope a lot of Indian IT males are listening.
Oh, certainly. There is no stigma attached to any subset of whatever applicant pool you think you are part of. Really, it's all about how are you going to articulate what you're articulating, and how true to yourself you are, and how well you have done your homework, that you're that you are talking genuinely about yourself as well as your interest in Tuck. At the end of the day, it's a very self-selecting class, and if you could, if you get in, we want you to be there because you're going to be happy, not because you just you're going to go through the motions.
Tell us about recommendations. Like, how do you evaluate recommendations? What are some general do's and don'ts with recommendations? I'm going to get the first one out of the way. A CEO versus direct supervisor.
So we do not attach any importance to the job title of the recommender. Okay, let me get it out straight. There is no weight of any sort to the job title. What we care more about is how well does the recommender know you, and how well are they able to represent you. And so many applicants who get from their CEO, the CEO may not know you as well, and he's probably doing you a favor because you asked him, and that effort shows. The application is, the recommendation is pretty brief. It doesn't really get into too much detail because, frankly, the CEO probably doesn't know you enough to give enough of a background about you and your abilities, and enough of enough things that probably doesn't have enough things to talk about. And so that very clearly shows. And so for us, it's more important that the person who is talking about you knows who you are, and not simply going through the motions just because you requested them and they're nice enough not to say no. Right. Some recommenders need in so many ways they need coaching too to write a good recommendation. Maybe your direct supervisor, he's probably never written a detailed recommendation before. Maybe it's just a few lines of this is a great candidate, why don't you take her as an admitted student. But we don't so it is really imperative on part of the candidate to tell the it again, there's a fine line between writing that application. We don't want the candidate to write the recommendation for the recommender for him or her to simply copy paste and submit, because that will come through as well. Right.
Could you please say that once again, because that's such a common question. My supervisor does not have time. My supervisor has asked me to write it, But like something that I always mention on the forums is that like when you put a checkbox on a sentence that says you are not writing that recommendation, maybe that's a hint that you shouldn't be writing recommendations.
Well, there is before you submit the Tuck application, you have to adhere to the Tuck honor code. Right? It says very clearly out there that nobody has been influenced, or you've not done things on other people's behalf, right? Or that the recommendations are entirely their own work, and that we expect you to abide by what you say you did. And unfortunately, many times there is this scourge, for lack of a better word, of people writing their own recommendations, and it comes through very clearly one way or the other. And I think the conversation stops right there, right, as far as the admissions committee is concerned. So we want to again err on the side of the candidate to the extent we can, but when we see something flagrant happening, we can't ignore that.
Sure.
And so there's a fine line between coaching the recommender on how to write a good recommendation and doing it yourself, so that the recommender is simply going through the motions of submitting it. And so many times I have seen, sometimes the recommenders are pretty smart. If they don't want to, if they want to show their displeasure about a candidate being over pushy about a recommendation, sometimes the candidates might push a lot, saying, I need you to recommend but the supervisor or whoever this recommender is simply not ready, right? Then you have to take you have to be smart about figuring out who is the right recommender also,
right?
Because so many times the recommenders actually do things that say it out loud and clear that this is not the right candidate, and you have to be very conscious of that. And so do not, I don't know how else to emphasize it, do not write your own recommendations, because it will come through if you do.
Right.
And it is okay to coach the recommender, saying when I say coach, it's just meeting over a coffee and sort of going through things that you've done, things that they've appreciated you in the past for, say that these are the things that you would like them to highlight in when they write the recommendation. Because and also more importantly, don't sort of spring it on the recommender at the last minute, because I can't speak about other schools, but the Tuck recommendation is pretty detailed. Right?
It is. It had 6 questions the last time, and it was more detailed than the essays also.
So and that is there for a reason. Again, the question of should it be a CEO, should it be your supervisor? A CEO will never be able to. If the CEO is your supervisor, then there is no problem. But if the CEO barely knows you and he or she has to write these 6 or how many more questions there are, there's not going to be that much depth in any of them. And that lack of depth is a disincentive.
Sure.
Right. At the same time, if your supervisor is super excited about how awesome a team member you are, we want to hear that, because that's a great testament for how you are a team player, how you're a go-getter, how you're going to make things happen, and we want to see that. Now there are some other supervisors who may not be excited about you leaving that job.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's always a little dicey when you go and ask them for a recommendation, and it's not a conducive environment at the in the workplace.
Maybe you don't want to admit that you're leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe the candidate is up for a promotion or something, and
right.
They don't want to run the risk of abandoning that by asking for a recommendation, because you're basically sending a signal that you are leaving the job in a few months. Right. In those cases, we want to know, those instances happen. That's reality. in those cases, we want to know, why you have not chosen your direct supervisor. And if you have a concern there, we need to know.
The optional
Right.
essay is a great space to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take advantage of because if you don't tell us, we will not know, and if we will
Why
not know,
was you-
we end up making assumptions that you don't want us to make.
Sure.
So make it very crystal clear about your thought process, your approach, and why you are making the decisions that you're making, and then let us do the job of evaluating those those inputs that you've given us,
Right.
rather than trying to circumvent it altogether and making a mess of it at the end.
Thank you for sharing that. So we are going to move away. We are past the 1 hour mark. It was a great conversation, but I do have a few lingering thoughts about Tuck and Dartmouth in general. But we do have covered a wide spectrum of application questions. So thank you so much for that.
Sure.
If I do have follow-up questions from the link on YouTube or from the forums, I'll be sure to send them to you. But I just also wanted to know, and I don't know how many of our listeners know this, but Tuck is also the first graduate school of business.
Correct.
It started in 1900, so it has been more than a century that Tuck has been in the game of doing MBA. So how do you feel the evolution has been for Tuck in the last 100 years of like graduate education on management?
Wow. So yeah, like you said, Tuck is the oldest graduate school of business. Started in 1900. At that time, and I sort of mentioned this in when in the course of the admissions receptions. But Tuck, when Tuck was founded, the United States was an emerging market, and at the time it was a very innovative idea to have business training for business leaders. It was sort of a path-breaking idea, and so the foundation of Tuck has been on innovation, on on thought leadership, and that continues to be the case today. Some of the most thought-leading faculty in the world are at Tuck. It's a pure 2-year MBA program without any of the the other flavors of the MBA. We don't have a weekend MBA. We don't have a part-time MBA. We don't have an executive MBA. We don't have a evening MBA. None of those flavors. It's a pure 2-year residential program, and that's the way it has been ever since its founding. What has changed is obviously it has adapted to the changing times, but it has always led the narrative in so many ways. And now with Dean Slaughter, he is very global in his approach. He's a celebrated scholar. He's a renowned researcher. He's a he's a very empathetic leader, and under his leadership, Tuck has it's continuing to march on that path of innovation. There's a lot of innovative programming in terms of the curriculum itself at Tuck. The whole idea of global mindset as a prerequisite for graduation, where the students who come to Tuck, irrespective of where they come from, will have to demonstrate global mindset in any number of ways before they graduate. So because ultimately Tuck graduates are going on into the wider world, and accomplishing many things in many different ways, and we want to give them the training ground at Tuck with Hanover as the base camp for the world. And so there's a lot of emphasis on creating a global mindset while you're here, while you're in Hanover. There's a lot of emphasis on developing leadership skills, and leadership is woven into the curriculum. But there's also a personal leadership class where each student gets a, he or she builds a personalized leadership development plan that stays with them for the rest of the year, for the 2 years and beyond, where they get 360-degree free feedback from their classmates about how they've evolved over time. So these are all ways in which Tuck continues to lead the way in terms of very impactful curriculum that is at the it's a top notch in terms of the learning, but also, like I said earlier, it's very personal, very connected, and certainly transformative.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing. I do have one last question, so to speak. Like, any parting thoughts? So, what about Tuck would you want GMAT Club listeners to know before we end the podcast?
What about Tuck that I haven't already said? Huh?
That's a tall order.
I think I've kind of covered pretty much, a broad spectrum about what Tuck stands for over the last hour or so. We want to get to know you really, really well. And so however you can connect with the school, there's a program called Tuck Connections. So you just go on the website, you sign up for, giving a certain, criteria that are you are interested in, and you will be connected to either a current student or an alum that meets those criteria that you set, so that you can get connected with that person and ask all sorts of questions that are raging through your mind. For example, someone from an oil and gas background might want to speak to someone who graduated from Tuck with an oil and gas background or is currently in an oil and gas industry.
Sure.
After graduation. So that's a direct way for them to see, to first of all get the confidence that this is a trodden path, well trodden path, and that someone else has already been there, done that, and how the candidate can see himself or herself in those shoes, a few years down the lane.
Right.
So take advantage of that platform. There is certainly a number of events all around the country and in the region in general. There is I think I'll take a minute to sort of mention that I already mentioned the mock class that's coming up on July 23rd in Hyderabad. You should definitely sign up for it if you haven't already. There is a Tuck admissions reception as against the mock class, which is a pure classroom session. There is no, there's no admissions pitch in that session other than Professor Kopalle talking about consumer research. And the Tuck admissions reception in Bangalore, that's coming up on the 29th of July. It's from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Hyatt Bangalore. Then we do something called the coffee chat. So it's not a broad reception catch-all sort of an event. It's a much more intimate coffee chat where it's a literally 1 on 10. So there's 10 people on the table.
Right.
There's me and maybe a couple of alumni who are there, and having a very very personal, sort of very high touch conversation for a good hour and a half or two. One of those coffee chats is coming up in Chennai. There's actually 2 coffee chats back to back, 3 to 4:30 p.m. and then following up from 5 to 6:30 p.m. on the 5th of August. That's a Saturday at Wild Garden Cafe in Chennai. Then there is the Tuck admissions reception again coming up in Mumbai on the 12th of August in Taj in Kolaba. Again, the timing again 7 to 9 p.m. The Delhi reception will be coming up on August 19th in Taj Mansingh again it's from 7 to 9 p.m. and a coffee chat in Kolkata in Salt Lake area. It's at a place called Afra Creperie. Again, coffee chats. I want to find an intimate setting where people can spend the time asking whatever questions they have in mind. So those are some of the events coming up specifically in India. There are other events coming up elsewhere in the region. So look up on the Tuck website and sign up. And I certainly look forward to seeing all of you in one or the other forum.
Also, as mentioned, attending a Tuck event is probably the best favor that you will do to yourself, short of visiting the campus. So I'll be sure to sharing all the links on the description box on this YouTube video. And so that's it from us today. Thank you so much, Sats, for joining us for a very, very long and great conversation. I'll be sure to keep in touch, and we will see you soon.
Well, thank you for having me, Savik. I hope the applicants find it, informative, and I've certainly enjoyed this conversation. It's always a pleasure to, go back to how my time at Tuck was and trying to replicate that excitement to the extent I can in conversations that I have with anyone. So hopefully you and your listeners will get some insights that you probably did not already have about the school, and I certainly hope to connect with everyone in due course.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and all the best for all the events that are coming up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.